Hi everyone and welcome to the web application deployment series and welcome to the last part of it. So in this part we will use Linode to basically deploy the application to production because now we have everything that we need and it is set up correctly with the Docker Compose, and the Docker Compose is ready to spin all the three containers together. So the only thing that we pretty much need to do is to create a server that will have Docker command line interface installed, and then we can basically copy the project to that production server and then we are good to go. So it is going to be very exciting to see how we can do this, and let's get started. Alright, so till that point, the only person that could access my website now was myself. And the reason for that, it is because the website was hosted on my local machine. But actually, when we want to turn this website to being hosted and to make it accessible to the entire web, then we have to create a server with a public IP address. And for that purpose, we need to use a cloud provider. And what this means that our server is going to be created as a virtual server in one of the cloud providers that exist out there. Now, there are tons of cloud providers that are very famous like AWS, GCP, Azure, and more. And for this video, we are going to keep things a little bit more simple and we are going to use Linode. Now, Linode is basically designed for spinning servers very quickly, so we are going to create an account in there and then we are going to see how we can create a server. And let's see how we can create a user in the Linode platform. Alright, so this is how the signing up window on Linode looks like. So as you can see, it is as easy as providing your email, username and password, and then you should be good to go. Now actually, when it comes to signing up to any cloud provider, it is also going to ask you for information for billing. So that means that you probably need to provide your personal credit card number to basically allowing Linode to charge you from the servers that you are going to create on this platform. So actually, in the description down below, I have a referral link that will allow you to start with first $20 for free. So make sure that you sign up from the link that I provided from the description, and I'm not sure about the amount of the free credit that you will get in your registration. Basically, I remember that it was $20, but it could be even more. And once you create this account, then there is going to be some approval process that always takes a few minutes, and once you submit the correct information, basically after a few minutes you should get an email that everything is okay, and then you should be good to go to use Linode. Now, if you're not really interested to sign up to Linode and provide your credit card, this still doesn't mean that you cannot follow this tutorial, because I will show everything step by step by already an account that I own, and I can really show you how to create a virtual server with a public IP address, and as well as configuring there everything that needs to be configured to basically come up with your website hosted and to make it accessible to everybody across the web. So let's get started with the account that I already have and see what needs to be done to basically create our server. Okay, so let's start with a short overview about how the Linode dashboard looks like. So as you can see, I'm already logged into this platform and my account is named JC Tutorials. And now you can see in the sidebar that we have different options that we can navigate through. Now, the only thing that we're interested to do in this Linode platform is creating a Linux server. And basically, we are going to create this Linux server and we need only Docker installed on it because we are already going to spin up the Flask Nginx and the database itself with Docker containers. So what that means? It means that the only dependency that we have in this Linux server is the Docker tool itself. So actually, when it comes to creating a server in Linode, there is something that is called Marketplace. And Marketplace offers you different servers that are already coming with some software installed on them. So if I go here and click on Create Linode, and basically when you say that you want to create a Linode in this platform, basically you mean that you'd like to create a server. So I'm going to click there, and then you can see that we have this marketplace, and this marketplace comes within some already ready images that are going to prepare the server for you with some software installed on it. So you can see that we have servers with Flask, Django, Jenkins, Grafana, and basically each tool that is dealing around software development. So the only thing that we're interested to have in our Linux server is Docker itself. Now if I go ahead and click create Linode, then you can see that it took us to an entirely different area. So here we have to fill in some dry information to basically come up with this server and launch it up. So we can actually select a dedicated image when we don't use a image from a marketplace. But in this case, I'm going to stick with the distribution of Debian because it is not so important right now, because we are only going to launch some commands with Docker, Docker Compose and stuff like that. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now down here you can see that we have to select a region. So basically it means that if you live in States, for example, then when you connect to that server, then it will be a lot easier for the connection to be established if you create this server in United States. So this is why maybe you want to click United States, something like Atlanta or any other state. Now in my case, I'm just going to click something randomly. Let's create this London, and then we are good to go. Now I'm not sure why it throws error yet, but I'm going to leave it as it is, so I think this should be okay. Alright, so now there's actually Linode plan that we need to choose. So I'm going to choose the cheapest plan for the purposes of this tutorial, and I recommend for you to choose the cheapest option as well, because first you want to maybe test things up before you really host your own website. So I'm going to do that, and as soon as I have done this, then you also have to scroll down and create your root password. Now the root user is the strongest user in any Linux distribution, and you have to set a default password when you are going to log in with the root user. So in that case, I'm going to create a random password for the purposes of this tutorial, but for your purposes, then it is recommended for you to create the strongest password as you can. So I'm just going to type in a password here. And now the only thing that you maybe want to do now is having a backup for your server. And it is actually a great idea to do this if you are really interested to host this website now in production, because for just only $2 per month, then you are going to have backups, so it will allow you to crash from disaster if something bad happens. So now we are ready to go and click on create Linode. And as soon as I have clicked this button, then we have to wait a minute or two before we actually go ahead and log into this Linux server. Now let's talk about the information that popped up in here. And as you can see, we have the public IP address, which is probably the most piece of information that we want to discuss about. Now, when it comes to IP addresses, not all the computers out there are going to have a public IP address. But when it comes to servers that really needs to host a website that is going to be accessible from everybody, then you must have a public IP for your server. And this is going to be the IP that we're going to use to basically start configuring this server, so we will have the ability to basically create there everything that we need to come up with our Docker Compose service. So this is a piece of information that we're definitely going to use to log into our server. Alright, so now I'm inside the command prompt on Windows. Now for the purposes of this tutorial, please be sure that you open your command prompt in administrator mode. So before you open your CMD, please be sure that you really click on run as administrator, because otherwise the commands that I'm going to show now might not function properly. So now I'm going to go inside PowerShell, and PowerShell is basically more robust and advanced command line utility that comes within Windows. So I'm going to say here PowerShell like that. Okay, so now I'm inside the PowerShell, and I'm actually going to execute one command that will be responsible to install the SSH client that I talked about. So let me paste this in right here. Okay, so what this PowerShell command does, it goes ahead and install a Windows capability or feature, whatever we want to call it, and it is named OpenSSH.Client. Now, as soon as I click enter in here, then for you it should take a few seconds, and as you can see I got an immediate response because I already have SSH.Client installed. So the only thing that you need to do to install this is basically say PowerShell and then run this command right after it. Okay, so now that I have done this, then basically to verify that I installed the SSH client, then I need to refresh my environment variables. So first, I'm going to clean our screen like that, and I'm going to click exit just to basically get out of the PowerShell back to command prompt. So I'm going to click enter, and then I'm going to say refresh env like that. Now this command is responsible to refresh the environment variables because we installed some new software to our Windows. So we need to make sure that the changes are really taken effect. So this means that we have to reload the environment variables so that we can use all the new commands that are installed. So I'm going to click here, and then now if we say SSH like that and we don't receive unrecognized command error, then it means that everything installed properly. Now till this point, if you have any problem, be sure to comment this down below so I can really help you out, or basically just look for another method to install SSH client to your Windows machine. And a quick side note, if you already use a Linux machine, then you don't really have to go ahead and install SSH client because in most of the Linux distributions that comes built in. Okay, so now I'm going to clean the screen now and go back to our Linode very quickly. So in here I said that this is the command that will allow us to basically connect to our server. So I'm going to copy that and go back to our terminal and paste this in like that. And now you can see that it already starts to recognize this IP address as a server that really exists. So I'm going to say yes. And then now I have to write in my password. So I'm going to basically type this in. Now, if this is the first time that you type password in terminal, then don't be shocked that you don't see the asterisk when you write it, because it really writes it in the background, but we don't see it. So just keep writing it and make sure that you write it correctly. Okay, so I already wrote my password, and now I am going to click enter. And now I am really inside this machine with the root user. Now you can see that because this is the user that we basically logged in with, and this is the name of our server. So it really means that now we were able to connect with SSH successfully, and it means that we can start configuring this server and really go ahead and spin up our Docker Compose service. Alright, so now we are logged into our Linux server. Now I know that there is actually a great option that you are not familiar with all the Linux commands out there because there are just hundreds of them, or maybe even thousands. So I will explain each Linux command that I am using in here to basically spin our Docker Compose service. Now if you also think that I should create some tutorials about the most useful Linux commands, then let me know this in the comment section so I can really know that this is something that you want to see on my channel. So to clean the screen now, it is not going to be CLS like in Windows, besides it is going to be clear. And then let's see what we need to do now. So if we want to see each of the directories in the current directory that I am on, then you can use ls. And if you want to output this with a more fancy way, then you can do ls-l, and it will give you a list with the directories and some more information about when the directories are created, and basically the user that is created it and the size of it on the server and stuff like that. Now I'd like to go to the root directory of this Linux server, so I can say cd and do something like that. So now if I say ls-l, then you can see that we have a lot of directories now that are inside the root directory. Now what I need to do is basically create a directory that is going to be dedicated for our entire application, and then we have to figure out how we are going to basically bring all the code of our project that we designed in the first two parts of this entire tutorial. So now I'm going to go inside this directory, which is var. So I'm going to say /var like that. And I'm going to create a directory that is going to be named app. So I can say make dir app like that. Now I want to go to this directory and turn it to my working directory. So I can say cd app like that. And now I'd like to clean our screen. So if we say here ls-l, then you can see that we don't have anything inside this directory. And I can prove you this also with the dir command like the following. So you can see that we don't have any results. So now we have to figure out how we are going to bring the project to this directory. And I actually published the entire project to GitHub, so we can use a git command to bring all the code that we already designed. So if we go to our GitHub now and look up for a repository that is named Flask deployment, then you can see that everything here is just as the same as what we have designed in the first two parts of this entire series. So see that we have the Docker Compose YAML, and if I zoom in a little bit, then you can see that the YAML syntax is very familiar now, because this is something that we wrote in the first two tutorials. So now I have to figure out how I'm going to bring this code to our server. And actually there is the option to use the command that is called git clone that will be responsible to bring everything within this repository to our Linux server. So you have to go to the link in there, which I will provide in the description for sure. And then I will go to code, and then I will basically click here to basically copy the link of this repository. And I'm going to go back to our terminal and I'm going to say git clone. And then I'm going to paste in our link that we have copied. So you can see that the command now is git clone and a link that is referring to our repository. So if I click enter now, then you can see that it started to basically download this project to this app directory. So I can prove you this by basically saying ls-l again. And you can see that now we have one directory that is named Flask deployment. And if I go inside Flask deployment like that and say again ls-l, then you can see that we have the Docker Compose and proxy, web, and everything that really needs to be here to create our application. So I'm going to clean the screen now and continue from here. Alright, so now we know that we only need to do two things to create our application with Docker Compose. So the first one is running the Docker Compose up command, and right after it we should create the database tables that are responsible to maintain information like the users and the items on our market. But before we go ahead and do those, then we want to go with probably some security steps that are considered as best practice when you host an application in a server. So an example of that could be maybe limiting the amount of ports that are going to be opened to everyone out there. So we might want to create a firewall and limiting the connections to our server, basically allowing only connections like SSH or connection with port 80, because this is the only connection that we want to go and let out of the server, right? We don't want to let any more connections rather than SSH for us to connect to the machine, and as well as the port of 80, which is HTTP protocol. So we are going to see how this should be configured. So first, we should go and start updating some packages. Now, when you create a new Linux server, then it is a great idea to first update the packages that needs to be updated before you go ahead and use some other tools that are going to be installed on this Linux server. So I'm going to say here something like apt-get update like that. Alright, so now that this is done, then we also like to execute this. So I'm going to say apt-get upgrade like that. Now, if there are any packages that needs to be upgraded from some version to a higher version, then this is the command that we want to execute. We want to upgrade all the packages and all the dependencies that are responsible to make this Linux server up and running. So I'm going to enter here, and I'd like to basically continue by saying Y, and It might take a minute or two to basically complete, and actually there are not a lot of upgrades as I can see from here because it is already completed. And let's clean the screen and see the next thing that we want to do now. Alright, so let's go ahead and start configuring our server a little bit to make it more secure. Now, I'll be honest with you, but there are actually tens or even hundreds of actions that you can apply to that server to make it more secure and to basically raise the level of your security. But I'm only going to set up a few settings that will help us to secure things a little bit, so it will keep things simple. So we want to install some utility that will help us to avoid connections that are not necessary. As I said earlier, the only connections that we want are HTTP and the SSH for us to log into that server. So for that purpose, we can install firewall, and firewall is a general word to basically manage the traffic that is enabled or disabled. So for that purpose, Linux comes in with something that is called uncomplicated firewall that we want to install now on this Linux server. So it will be as easy as saying something like apt-get install, and then this uncomplicated firewall is called UFW in a shortened way. So I'm going to run this command, and this will go ahead and basically install the UFW. Now I can already see that it is something that is already installed, but it is actually great that we ran this command because it really makes sure that it is installed. Alright, so now that we have the UFW installed, then let's see how we can configure it. Now basically each configuration could be applied with using the UFW command. And for example, if we want to see the status of the firewall now, then we can say UFW status like that. And as you can see, by default, the firewall now is up and running. And as you can see, the only connection that is allowed now is port 22. So this means that the only allowed connection in this firewall is SSH, because this is the port number of SSH. So now we only want to allow one more connection once this firewall is up and running. So the port that we want to enable is 80 because this is the port of our HTTP. So I'm going to say here UFW allow, and I will say 80/TCP like that. And now if I click enter, then you can see that it is being added as a rule to our firewall. And now if I go ahead with UFW status, then you can see that now we got SSH allowed and as well as HTTP allowed. So now we should be good to go and to really test our application once we execute the docker compose up command. So I'm going to say here docker dash compose up space dash d like that. And if you remember, docker compose up was the command to basically spin up each container within the docker compose YAML file, and the -d argument will allow us to execute this in detach mode. So I'm going to say enter. And now it should take a minute before everything is up and running. So let's wait for the results of this execution. Perfect. So we really got everything installed with one command, and this is pretty amazing and impressive. So if I scroll up a bit, then you can see here that it installed the image that we have created for our Flask application itself. And if I scroll down here, then you can see all the pip install commands that are being executed. And down here we also got the nginx being installed. And down here we see the Postgres database being installed. Now, as you can see, everything has been created successfully. So now I can clean the screen and I can say docker-compose ps like that. And you can see that everything is up and running. And before we test this out, let's see the status of our uncomplicated firewall. So I'm going to say UFW status again. And you can see that port 80 is allowed like expected. And as well as our application now is being hosted in port 80. So what this means? It means that if now we go to the public IP address from the web browser, then it really means that our website works perfectly. So I will go back to our browser and I will grab the IP address of our server and copy this here and paste this in on a new tab. And if I press enter, then you can see that our application is really up and running, and it takes only one command. So now you can really see the benefit of all the hard work that we put in the second part of this entire series. We basically created this YAML file with the 3 containers, and then we grabbed everything and pasted everything in this server, and now everything is up and running with only one basic command, which is docker compose up. Now, just a kind reminder, not everything should function properly because the tables are not created yet within our Postgres instance. So I can prove you this by saying register and try to create a new user. So I will try to create a user with JSC, and I will say jsc.com, and I will type in a basic password, and if I click register, then you can see that we have an internal error. And if I go back to our terminal and I will say docker compose logs, then you will see that the database is complaining about tables that are not exist, and this could be found in here. So you can see that it says undefined table. So I'm going to basically complete the same steps like in the second part of this entire series. So I'm going to clean our screen and I'm going to grab the name of the container of our Flask application. So it will be by docker compose ps, and the name of our container of the Flask is web_1. So I'm going to say docker exec with interactive mode, and I'm going to paste in the name of our container. And now the command that I'd like to execute needs to come here. So it will be /bin and again /bash. So this entire command will allow us to kind of go and inspect inside our container. So if I click enter, then you can see that now I'm inside the container, as the ID here has been changed to the ID of the container. And now if we say something like dir, then you can see that we only see the information, or meaning the files and directories of the Flask project itself. So it really means that we were able to connect to our container successfully. And now we want to go inside Python and we want to say from market import db, and we like to execute db.create_all like that. And this should be a method, so make sure that you open and close parentheses. And now if I press enter and go out of Python, and as well as exit our container, and I verify that everything is still up and running with saying docker compose ps again, and everything is really up and running. So now I can go back to our website and test creating an account one more time. So it will be just refreshing this homepage and basically trying to register again. So I can say jsc.com and a short password, and now I can create an account. So you can see that the account has actually been created. So it really means that the website is up and running. And now I'm already inside the available items on the market page, and as well as in owned items page. Now actually here it makes totally sense to create the items that we like to create to basically test the action of buying and selling items. So I'm going to go back to our container again and basically create some items, and this will mean that our market will really have some items. So let's go back to our terminal and try to create some items. Alright, so we are back at our terminal, and I'm basically going to go again back to our container by connecting to it. So first let's clean the screen, and now I will execute the same command like we have executed previously. So I'm going to press here up arrow a couple of times, and this is the command that we are looking for. we are looking to go back inside our container. So I will execute this command once again, and now this means that we are inside our Flask container. So I will go to Python here, and I will say from market import db, and as well as from market dot modules import item, like that, because we probably want to create some items now in our market. So now I can say I is equal to an instance of an item, and I can say that we'd like to create name equals to phone. And if you remember, we also got the field of barcode, which is a string with a unique length, so it should be 12 characters, like that. And now we also like to give description to our item, so we can say this is a perfect phone that you must buy, something like that. And now I can basically save our changes to the database. So it will be db.session.add, and I can add the I, which is an instance of item. And now to save the changes, we should say db.session.commit, like that. And if we don't receive any errors, then it means that we have done a great job. So if we go to our website again and refresh this page, then you can see that we really see an item in the market. So if I click more info, then we can see the description, and if we click on purchase and approve it, then you can see that everything really functions well, and I can sell this item back to market like we have done in the development mode throughout the Flask series. So you can see that everything really functions perfect, and our budget is back to 1000, which is the default value. And you can really go ahead and create as much as items as you want to really turn this into being a market with multiple items that different users can buy or sell. Alright, so now that we have our website up and running, then there are going to be some still security additions that we like to add. For example, till that point, we know that not the only port 80 is the port that is going to be accessible from the entire web. And I can prove you that by easily going to our web browser and basically changing the way that I access to this website. So if I was to open a new tab and again insert the public IP address and then try to access to our website with the port 5000, which is going to be the port of the Flask, then I will still end up by accessing to that website. And what that means, it means that the Docker Compose service still exposes this port to the entire server. So this means that this is going to be accessible by everybody. And even the port 5432, which is the port of the Postgres, is going to be accessible by everybody. So this is something that we for sure want to change, because there might be a lot of hackers that might try to steal your information by trying to access this Postgres port, which is again 5432. So I actually draw a sketch about how the network of our Docker Compose looks now. So let me present that. Alright, so here we got the architecture of the server that we have right now. So we got the entire server, and it is actually now accessible by everybody if we open some ports. And within this server, we got three services that are connected to each other: Nginx, DB, and Flask. Now, if we think about it, Nginx is trying to talk with Flask to basically redirect the incoming traffic to the Flask itself, which is running based on GUnicorn. So first a client comes and tries to speak with this Nginx service, and since 80 is the port that is making it accessible, then we have access to see the content of the website. And now the Nginx is trying to redirect the traffic to Flask. And if you remember, it does it thanks to the configuration file that we have wrote in the Nginx, which I will show in a minute if you forgot about it. And the Flask application needs to talk to the database to basically perform some actions against it, like login, register, maybe purchasing an item or stuff like that. So the Flask is trying to talk to the DB. But the problem is anyone could also access to DB directly and to the Flask application directly. So what that means? It means that our Docker Compose file now should be changed a little bit to basically prevent from the entire world to access to our DB and to our Flask application directly, because we want everybody to go through the Nginx itself. So let's see what I draw here basically with the terminal of our server, and things are going to make a lot of sense for you once I show this in the terminal as well. Alright, so I'm back at our terminal, which I logged into the server now. Now if I say here docker compose ps, then you can see that not only port 80 is accessible through web, but as well as 5432, which is the DB, and also the web. And now we can basically allow ourselves to change this docker compose YAML file to not make those ports accessible to the entire world, because the only elements, so-called, that are need to be accessed to the DB and to the Flask application is the Nginx itself. So if you remember, let me show you some of the configurations that we have wrote. So I'm going to open our PyCharm, and in here, if I go to proxy and then inside the configuration file, then you can see that the Nginx itself is trying to talk with the Flask application by its domain name, and the same thing goes for the Flask application trying to talk to the DB. So if I go to web and then market and config, then we could see that the pg_host is the domain name DB, and that is something that we could do because the docker compose.yaml file has the services names as web and DB. So it really means that we can now get rid of those lines and as well as those lines. Now I'm not going to perform those changes in the GitHub repository itself, because maybe you want to leave them open for testing cases, so I'm not going to touch the GitHub repository for that purpose. Besides, I'm going to take the changes inside our server only by editing those files with the Linux terminal. So let's open our terminal now and change those configurations and see if everything really is going to function properly, even though I'm going to stop exposing those ports outside. So now I'm going to say vi docker-compose YAML like that. And actually, when it comes to Linux, then there are going to be tons of editors that can allow you to edit your files. And VI or maybe Nano are good candidates for tools that will allow you to edit your files. Now, I know that there is a great chance that you never edited a Linux file, so I'm going to take this step by step and slowly. Alright, so if now we click enter, then you can see that we are totally inside our docker compose YAML file. So now there are actually going to be some modes that will decide what action you want to take with this file. So since we'd like to delete some lines, then I'm going to press on insert on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go down a bit and basically delete those lines from here. So I will do it very carefully to not really mess up this YAML file, because messing up YAML files are not so complicated. You only have to make a mistake of one indentation and then you screwed up everything. So now that we have deleted this, then for sure I'm not going to touch the proxy ports because we need port 80 open and we need to expose this outside. And now I'm going to go here and also delete the ports from the database itself. And again, I can do this because we have all the three containers in one inner network, so it means that we don't have to expose those outside. So now that I have completed this, then I'm going to press on escape, and then right after it I'm going to say :wq like that. Now I know that this is something that might be very confusing, but now actually if you take a look at the bottom here, then you can see that we got a very unique line that is basically describing the actions that you'd like to take after you edit and change this file. So :WQ stands for quit and save. So this is why I can allow myself to do this, and then right after it press enter, and now our changes have been saved. And to prove you that, then I can basically read this file again. So I can do cat docker compose YAML, and this will display the content of our file, and you can see that the ports are no longer here and as well as no longer here. Okay, so now let's go and clean the screen. And now I can basically take our services down and rebuild this up. So I can say docker compose down. Alright, so once this done, then I can basically say again docker compose up -d like that. Alright, so our application should be up and running again. Now to verify this, then I can say docker compose ps. And now you can see that the only ports that are exposing their traffic to the server are proxy ports. So it means that only port 80 again should be accessible from the entire web. So now I'm going to go back to our browser, and then I will try to refresh from trying to access to our website with port 5000. So if I refresh it, then you can see that we don't get any response back. So this means that we were able to complete this perfect. And now I will try to do the same with the port 80. So now let's try to refresh this page. And you can see that now everything works here as expected. So what that means, it means that we limited the options of traffics that could come into our website, and as well as the database traffic is not going to be available to everybody. So this could be something that you really want to customize and change to really take some lower risks when it comes to host your production server. Now to make really sure that the connection to the database works as well, then we can try to log out, and then you can see that it works, and we can try to register a new account. So I can say maybe jsc2, and I can create jsc2 at jsc.com, and I can provide in a basic password. And now if I create an account, then you can see that everything really functions, and I can still purchase an item, and I can still sell this back. So this really means that the inner network, which is the Docker Compose network, does its job perfectly, and we don't really need to expose traffic outside that is not necessary. Alright, so there's going to be one security layer that I'd like to add to this server. Now, if you think about it, from the very beginning of this entire part, we customized some rules that will allow traffic through specific ports like 22 or 80, but we did not wrote any rule that will say something like block every traffic from any other port that someone is trying to access. So what that means, it means that we can also write some denying rules that will deny every incoming traffic which are not in the ports that we like, which is 22 or 80. Now we really want to be careful by typing in the command that will denying every traffic in each port, because we by mistake can deny the traffic in SSH, and this means that our server will not be accessible by SSHing anymore. So we are kind of taking ourselves outside of the server, so we should be careful by doing this. So first, we should verify that the allow rules for our firewall are still as it is. So I will clean the screen now, and I will say UFW status like that. And you can see that everything is just as expected. The only ports that we are allowing are 22 and 80. So now we can actually say something like UFW default deny incoming like that. And this command will be responsible to check out all the allowed ports and to basically deny all the traffic that are not the allowed ports which are specified in the status of the UFW, which is the firewall. So now if I press enter in here, then this command should really be responsible to deny everything. And you can see that default incoming policy changed to deny, and it suggests to us to be sure to update your rules accordingly. So now this means that everything is disabled beyond the ports that we want, and this is something that you also want to take in consideration because it is a perfect addition to make your server even more secure. Alright, so I think that there are no limits of security additions that you can include with your servers, and each one of them is important to basically make sure that your website is hosted and it is secure enough. Now I want to talk about maybe more suggestions that you maybe want to take in consideration before you really go ahead and host a web server. Now, for sure, the first thing that you'd like to do is to purchasing a domain name and to basically associate this domain name with the public IP address. Now, let me know if this is something that you want to see tutorial on, because this is a separated topic that really takes some more time, because actually associating a domain name with a public IP could take some time to explain, so I really want to create a separated tutorial on that. If this is something that you are interested in, then let me know this in the comment section. And you also want to take in consideration maybe creating more users in this Linux server, because if you think about it, the root user is a user name that everyone knows that it is the strongest user in the Linux servers, and it does not matter which kind of Linux distribution we talk about. And what this means that if there is a hacker that wants to steal information from your server, then the hacker is halfway there because he already knows your username, which is root. So you maybe want to create more users with different names and then basically give it sudo privileges. Now, sudo privileges basically stands for strong permissions that you give to that other user. So again, those things are great things to basically improve the security of your server. And you might also know that in Linux you can prevent from specific users to basically allowing them SSH connections. So once you create a user with sudo privileges, then you can basically deny from root user to log in. So this means that now the only new user that you have created will be able to SSH to that server. So this is a really great addition to prevent from different hackers to try to steal your information. And one other thing that you might also consider doing, if you are going to have a huge amount of traffic, then you probably don't want to manage this with only one server. And besides, you want to use an orchestration tool like Kubernetes with multiple servers that is going to create a strong cluster for you. Now, also having a certificate for your website is quite important. So this is why you can go ahead and purchase a certificate for your website and basically implement it on your server. Now, I know there are a lot of utilities that will allow you to have certificate for free, like Let's Encrypt, which is a great tool to have certificate for free for your website. So let me show you what I mean by having even a certificate. So when you have a certificate, basically you are having more secure traffic. So if we bring our website for a minute, then you can see that up top here it says us that the connection to this site is not secure, and this is because we are not using port 443, besides we are using port 80. So the differences between those is that the HTTP is the port to basically have traffic with the websites, but HTTPS does it with an addition of some security. So having a certificate for your website is also a wonderful idea before you really go ahead and publish it. And like I said before, all the suggestions that I gave in the last few minutes might be a good candidates for topics that I maybe want to create tutorials on. So write me down if you think that I should create tutorials on one of those. Alright everyone, so I hope that you understood everything about this series, and I hope that you will have some good feedback about it. So if you have any questions about the entire deployment, then feel free to write this in the comment section or even writing me a message in one of the social medias. So if you enjoyed this video, then please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel, and I will see you very soon.